When the world betrayed her, the one who shouldn't have saved her did. When crowns fell, their loyalty forged the dawn of a new era. Their scars became an oath, and the stars, their next battlefield. The rain hammered the broken stones of the ancient courtyard, turning blood into rivers across the cracked tiles. Banners that once flew proud now hung in tatters, snapping weakly against the dying wind. Thunder rolled overhead, low and savage, as if the sky itself bore witness to the last stand below. At the heart of the ruin, where the throne of the last alliance once stood tall, she remained. Tall, unyielding, crown shattered, sword broken, armor cracked and smoking from the plasma blasts. Yet her eyes, sharp, cold, unrelenting, still burned with the fire of a queen who refused to kneel. Around her, the enemy closed in. Mercenaries, betrayers, even former allies. They circled like wolves sensing blood, laughing behind the visors of their powered exosuits, voices distorted by modulated speakers. Your reign ends here, one spat, leveling a heavy particle rifle at her chest. The world will forget you by the next sunrise. She tightened her grip around the broken hilt in her hand. Not to fight. There was no fight left. But because even in the end, she would rather die standing than beg. And yet, just as the first shot screamed toward her, a figure moved. Not a knight, not a sworn guard, not a loyal noble. A prisoner. A slave, little more than a number etched into a tattered uniform, his chains still clinking against each desperate stride. He threw himself into the line of fire without hesitation. The blast struck him in the ribs, spinning him sideways. Another ripped through his thigh. He stumbled but did not fall, raising a battered forearm in some pathetic, beautiful attempt to shield her from the onslaught. For one perfect, terrible moment, the world stopped. He didn't look back at her. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, bleeding, shaking, refusing to fall, daring the universe to take him before he had done what little he could. She blinked once, the only betrayal of her shock. Why? Why would someone who owed her nothing, someone she had condemned to rot in chains, choose to die for her? The second shot never came. The enemy faltered, confusion crackling across their comm channels. And in that moment of hesitation, she moved. With a snarl ripped from somewhere deep and primal, she lunged, seizing a fallen rifle from the cracked stones. Her wounded arm screamed in protest, her vision blurred, but she fired, and 3 traitors fell before they could react. The rest scattered, not out of fear of her, but because deep down they had seen it too. Something had changed. Not because of politics, not because of bloodlines, because a broken man had stood for something and reminded them all that loyalty cannot be bought. It must be given. She dropped the rifle, art hammering, blood pouring from the gash along her ribs. Slowly, carefully, she crossed the few steps between them. He was still standing, somehow. Barely. Shaking. Bleeding from wounds that should have killed him twice over. She reached out. Her fingers, once accustomed only to commanding legions, now brushed his arm with something close to reverence. Why? She whispered. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. Still, he smiled. A broken, defiant, human smile. Because you still fight, he rasped. And that's worth it. The words hit harder than any bullet, more honest than any oath. Without ceremony, without court approval, without permission from any council, she knelt before him. Not as a queen, as a woman acknowledging a debt she could never repay. And for the first time in 1,000 years, history shifted. Not because an empire demanded it, because one soul dared to believe a crown could still mean something. The storm held around them. But within that shattered courtyard, under the broken sky, something new was born. Forged not by conquest, but by sacrifice. The healers came too late. When the medics of the fractured alliance finally stormed the courtyard, guns raised and armor scorched, they found the queen not atop a dais or behind a wall of shields, but kneeling in the rain beside a bleeding, nameless man. No orders screened, no ceremonies sung, just a monarch cradling loyalty in its purest, bloodied form. They tried to pull her away, tried to shout protocol, scream of danger, remind her she was the last sovereign of a dying world. She did not move. Instead, she barked one order, and only one. Save him. The command cracked through the air with the force of a gunshot. It wasn't a plea. It was a decree from someone who had decided that this man's life was now worth more than 1,000 crowns. The medics hesitated only a second. Then they scrambled, hands moving fast, cutting away the ruined fabric, injecting synth stems, patching gashes with trembling fingers. He fought them even as he bled. Kept trying to rise. Kept trying to stand between her and every threat, even imaginary ones. Easy, one whispered, pinning his shoulders gently. You're safe. She's safe. He sagged then, not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of knowing he could finally fall without failing her. The queen stayed by his side the entire time. When they lifted him onto the evac stretcher, she walked beside it. When they rushed him through the shattered halls of the citadel, she matched their pace. When the last defenders closed the broken gates behind them, sealing the survivors in for one final stand, she never once glanced back. Because her future wasn't behind her anymore. It was bleeding out in front of her. They reached the inner sanctum, a makeshift triage in what had once been the Hall of Concords, where treaties between worlds were signed in gold and arrogance. Now the marble floors were slick with blood. Now the once proud mosaics hung in shredded ruins. Now, a single human lay on a battered gurney, stitched together with nanofiber mesh and desperate prayers. She stood vigil. Hours passed. Then days. The world outside burned. Cities fell. Allies betrayed their oaths. Empires crumbled. But within that broken fortress, the queen guarded something rarer than any throne, a bond not written in law or power, but in choice. When finally, he stirred, a twitch of battered fingers, a slow grimace of pain, she was there. He cracked one eye open, bloodshot and dazed. His voice was a wreck, barely a rasp. Still ugly, he croaked. She smiled. A small thing. A private thing. But it lit her face more than any crown ever had. And still stubborn, she said, voice low, fierce, proud. He shifted, trying to sit up, and immediately swore under his breath. She caught him with surprising gentleness, easing him back down with strong hands. Hands that had once shattered dynasties now trembled to keep him steady. You should have run, he muttered, lips splitting into a half-grin. You should have let me die, she replied. Yeah, well, he wheezed. We're both bad at following orders. Silence settled between them, heavy and fragile. Finally, he asked, what now? She looked toward the ruined doors of the hall, beyond which lay a dying world. And then back to him. To the man who had thrown himself into death without expectation, without hesitation. We rebuild, she said simply. Not from banners and bloodlines. From people who choose to stand. He closed his eyes, a rough sound, half laugh, half cough or rattling from his chest. Sounds impossible. She smiled again, colder this time, a glint of something savage and bright in her gaze. Good, she said. Impossible is what we do best. The healers came and went. Strategists brought maps dripping with bad news. Generals whispered demands for executions, for purges, for vengeance. She ignored them all. Instead, she sat beside the human, day after day, learning his name, listening to his history, tracing the scars that told stories without needing words. He wasn't noble. He wasn't pure. He wasn't even particularly kind. But he had made a choice when it mattered most. And that made him more valuable than 1,000 soldiers bred for obedience. One night, under the broken stars, when the fires on the horizon finally dimmed, she asked him a question she had never dared ask anyone. Will you fight with me? Not for her. With her. He didn't answer immediately. He simply reached out, rough hand closing over hers, grounding her like an anchor against the storm. I already am, he said. No ceremony. No pledge. No grand declarations. Just a simple truth between warriors who had bled too much to lie anymore. The queen, no, the woman, smiled, fierce and wild and free. Together, they would build something better. Or they would die trying. Either way, they would not kneel. Not to fate. Not to fear. Not to the memory of fallen empires. They would stand. Together. And sometimes, that was enough to change the world. The fortress fell before dawn. The last defenses, brittle and desperate, cracked under the weight of orbital bombardments and betrayal. Once proud walls crumbled into ash. The banners of 1,000 conquered worlds, once hung from the spires in arrogance, burned like paper against the endless black of the sky. But within the ruins, two figures stood. Unyielding. Unbroken. The human wore no armor save the thick scars stitched across his skin. No emblem save the battered black band the queen herself had fastened to his wrist, a relic of 1,000 years of rule, now reborn not in bloodlines, but in choice. In her. She no longer wore a crown. She didn't need to. It was in the way she moved. The way she looked at the enemy massing beyond the shattered gates. The way her very presence dared the universe to try and break her again. The palace guard, what's left of them, clustered around her, nervous, unsure. They looked to their generals. They looked to their faded banners. They looked to each other. But the queen, she looked only at the human. And he understood. Not a word passed between them as they prepared. She drew a short sword, cracked and pitted but still sharp where it mattered. He tightened the wrappings on his fists, each movement slow and deliberate, like a man wrapping his will into his bones. The first wave hit like a storm. Mercenaries armored in black exosuits. Betrayers wielding pulse spears. Beasts from shattered alliances, teeth glinting under bloodied banners. The guards faltered. The generals hesitated. But not them. Not the queen. Not the human. She moved like a blade unsheathed, fast and brutal, every step a symphony of violence. He fought like a force of nature, messy, raw, relentless, fist crashing into plated armor, bones breaking under the ferocity of his refusal to die. They fought not to survive. They fought because standing was its own kind of rebellion. One enemy tried to flank her, a towering brute in power armor wielding a plasma axe. The human saw it before she did, already bleeding from a dozen cuts. He didn't think. He moved. Tackling the brute mid-swing, He crashed them both into the shattered wall, a roar ripping from his throat. The plasma blade skimmed his shoulder, searing flesh to bone, but he didn't let go. He never let go. She heard the impact, turned in time to see him bury a shard of broken marble into the brute's throat, blood spraying across the stones. Their eyes met across the chaos. No words. Just understanding. The human staggered back toward her, limping, one arm hanging useless at his side. Still standing. Still fighting. She covered his approach without hesitation, carving down 2 more mercenaries and sweeping, vicious arcs. Their blood stained her armor, but she barely noticed. There was only the fight. Only the stubborn beat of her heart and the burning light in his eyes. Together, they drove the enemy back step by bloody step. But they were only 2. And the universe does not favor miracles. When the final breach came, it was not with fanfare or glory. It came with exhaustion. It came with weight. It came with inevitability. They stood back to back in the ruined courtyard where it had all begun, breathing hard, blood matting their hair, smoke choking the air. The enemy surrounded them. Hundreds. Maybe more. No way out. No surrender. He turned slightly, grinning at her through bloody teeth. Got a plan. Your Highness. She wiped blood from her eyes, sword drooping slightly in her exhausted grip. Yes, she said. He raised an eyebrow. We die well. He barked a laugh, raw, broken, true. Figures, he said. Always the optimist. The enemy closed in, weapons raised. The end loomed. But as they prepared for one final charge, something shifted. Above the ruins, lights bloomed. Not the cold fire of orbital cannons. Not the burning debris of dying ships. Ships. Real ships. Markings they didn't recognize, bright against the night, fierce against the dark. A new fleet tore through the atmosphere, plasma cannons lighting the clouds from within, dropships streaking down like falling stars. The human squinted up, blinking smoke from his eyes. Reinforcements? He rasped. She shook her head slowly, wonder creeping into her battered expression. No, she said. Something better. The first wave of dropships hit the ground with bone-shaking force. Ramparts fell. New warriors poured out humans. Armored differently. Moving with brutal, efficient coordination. Not the humans she had conquered years ago. These were different. These were free. And they had come for him. The enemy broke first. The mercenaries, the betrayers, the cowards, they scattered before the tide of furious freedom. He staggered as one of the new soldiers reached him, a woman in gray armor, her face wild with battle rage and fierce with relief. Sir, she shouted over the din, we've been looking for you. He blinked, blood dripping from his brow. You're late. She laughed, grabbed him by the arm, and pulled him upright. The queen watched silently, sword lowered, as the tide turned. In the end, the empire didn't fall because it was conquered. It fell because it forgot something vital. Hope spreads faster than fear. And loyalty, real loyalty, can't be stamped out by crowns or chains. It bleeds. It burns. It survives. Together, they stumbled toward the evac ships. Not a queen and her captive. Not a prisoner and his ruler. But 2 warriors, bound by the scars they chose to carry, and the impossible dream they refused to let die. The rain still fell. The world still burned. But somewhere, beyond the smoke and the blood, the stars were waiting. The air inside the evac ship was thick with the stench of scorched metal, blood, and something worse, the sharp, bitter stink of endings. The engines roared as they lifted from the broken palace grounds, carving pillars of fire into the night sky. Below them, the shattered remains of an empire smoldered like a dying pyre. No cheers. No songs of triumph. Only the quiet, raw breathing of survivors who had given everything and barely lived to remember it. The human sagged against the cold plating of the transport bay, breath rattling through bruised lungs. His wounds were a patchwork of rushed field repairs, mesh bindings, blood-stained gauze. Every heartbeat was a hammer strike of pain. Every breath was a battle. Still, he grinned at her. You owe me a drink, he rasped. The queen, no crown, no throne, just herself now, knelt beside him, smoothing blood-matted hair away from his brow with fingers that had once signed the death warrants of worlds. Several, she said, voice roughened by smoke and grief. And a kingdom. He chuckled weakly, then grimaced as the motion pulled at a broken rib. Around them, the rescued soldiers, the humans who had come for him, moved with crisp efficiency. Some secured the wounded. Others checked weapons and armor, their faces grim under scarred helmets. They carried the look of people who had fought too many battles to believe in easy victories. One of the new commanders approached, her armor dark and battered. The sigil of a rising phoenix burned across her chestplate. She saluted the human sharply, fist to heart. Sir, she said, we need to get you stabilized. Command has been waiting a long time. He frowned. Command? She nodded, glancing briefly at the queen, wary, respectful, confused. You lit the beacon, she said simply. We answered. The queen looked at the human, eyes narrowing. You called them. He shook his head slowly. A painful grimace twisting his face. Didn't need to. Word travels. even faster than fleets. She understood then. It wasn't a signal. It was the act itself. One man standing between death and a crown. One man choosing to protect instead of destroy. It had echoed through the broken human colonies like a pulse of thunder. And they had answered. Not out of duty, not for orders. Because belief, once kindled, burns hotter than any fire. The ship jolted violently, throwing her off balance. Alarms flared red across the consoles. Enemy fire incoming, a pilot barked. They don't want us leaving. The ship pitched hard to starboard, inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. Outside the thin hull, anti-air batteries screamed to life, their bolts carving crimson scars across the darkness. The commander turned, urgency slicing into her voice. Strap in. Now. The Queen grabbed the human under his arms, heaving him upright despite his grunt of protest. No arguments, she snapped, half carrying, half dragging him to a crash couch. He sagged into the harness as the ship shuddered again, another near miss slamming shockwaves through the frame. The Queen strapped herself into the seat across from him. For the first time, they faced each other without a war between them. Just raw exhaustion, mutual scars, and a future they hadn't dared imagine. He reached out, hand trembling from blood loss. She took it without hesitation, her fingers wrapping tightly around his. The world outside tried to kill them. The engine screamed. The ship rattled under the weight of survival. But within that fragile space, two souls, battered, broken, unbeaten, refused to let go. Not now. Not ever. The commander leaned into the cockpit comms. Punch it. Get us to orbit. The pilot complied. The engines surged, a roar that drowned out everything else. Gravity pinned them to their seats as the ship tore through the atmosphere, racing toward the waiting stars. He squeezed her hand once, weakly, stubbornly. She squeezed back. Above them, the heavens opened, vast, endless, uncaring. But they would rise into it together. No longer ruler and captive. No longer human and queen. Something more. Something harder to name. The transport cleared the last atmospheric layers, bursting into the cold clarity of space. Alarms died one by one. The rattling faded. The only sound left was the thrum of engines and the shared breath of survivors. He slumped back, finally letting exhaustion win. The Queen leaned forward, resting her forehead against the back of his hand, armor scraping softly against metal. A silent vow passed between them. You saved me once. Now we save each other. A fleet waited ahead, not grand, not vast, but real. Made of those who had chosen to believe. Made of those who still remembered how to stand when everything else burned. Behind them, the empire crumbled. Ahead of them, something unclaimed beckoned. Freedom, rebirth, war. It didn't matter. They would face it together. As equals. As warriors. As something more durable than thrones or crowns. As hope. The stars stretched endlessly before them. A vast ocean of cold fire and infinite darkness. The fleet, if it could be called that, was rough, ragtag, stitched together from relics of old wars and whispered dreams. No two ships looked the same. Some bore the sleek lines of lost golden ages. Others bristled with welded armor and jury-rigged weapons scavenged from forgotten battlefields. But each vessel thrummed with a single truth. They had come not because they were ordered. They had come because they chose to fight. The Queen stood at the viewing bay of the flagship, battered, blood-stained, unbowed, staring out into the abyss. Her armor was cracked. Her body screamed with 100 invisible wounds. But her eyes burned brighter than ever. Beside her, the human leaned heavily against the bulkhead, still pale, still bleeding inside, but alive, stubbornly, impossibly alive. He caught her watching him and smirked weakly. You keep looking at me like I'm a miracle, he rasped. You are, she said simply. He snorted, winced, and muttered. Low standards, Your Majesty. She didn't smile. Not this time. Because she saw something few others could. Not the wounds. Not the scars. The fire. The fleet commander, a grizzled woman with one cybernetic arm and a permanent sneer, stomped toward them across the deck. Status, the human asked, voice rough but steady. She didn't waste time. Minimal supplies. Skeleton crews. Half our reactors are running hot. Enemy fleets inbound in 36 hours. The Queen turned sharply. Which enemy fleets? The commander shrugged grimly. All of them. The human nodded once, slowly, like a man accepting the weather before a storm. And the odds? He asked. The commander laughed without humor. 0. He grinned. She wanted to hit him for that. She wanted to kiss him for that. Instead, she stepped forward, the battered folds of her cloak swirling around her boots. Then we'll make them bleed for every inch, she said. And we'll build something from the ashes. The crew on the bridge, hardened fighters who had seen too much and trusted too little, straightened subtly. Some saluted. Others simply nodded. But in their eyes, raw, battered, something sparked. Faith. Not in banners. Not in bloodlines. In them. The human pushed off the wall, staggering slightly before she caught his arm without thinking. He squeezed her wrist once in silent thanks. "Where's the worst of it?" he asked the commander. The woman blinked. "You just got pulled out of a firestorm," she said. "You should be in Mebe." "Later," he rasped. "Point me toward the bleeding edge." The commander smiled then, a real, savage thing. "I like him," she muttered to the queen, then pointed at a red sector blinking on the holomap. Heavy carrier group, former mercenaries, now working for the highest bidder. They're arming up asteroid cannons to shatter us before we even form ranks. The human studied the map. "Then we hit them first," he said. The queen stepped beside him, her voice carrying authority without effort. "Hard. Fast. Decisive. You'll need a strike team," the commander said. "You have one," the queen answered without hesitation. The commander opened her mouth, then shut it, recognizing the steel in the queen's voice, and something even more terrifying. Hope. Real hope. The kind that turns broken fleets into legends. Preparations moved fast. Dropships were fueled, armories opened. Old battle suits were pulled from storage, some barely holding together. Volunteers queued up without needing orders, tightening old straps, checking battered weapons, their faces grim and shining all at once. The human struggled into light combat gear, no armor too heavy, no exoskeleton to slow him down, just enough to keep him breathing a little longer. His body protested every move, but he forced it into obedience. She watched him, silent. When he caught her gaze, he raised an eyebrow. "You coming?" "As if I'd trust you alone," she said. He smiled, a ghost of what it once was, but still enough to make her heartbeat hitch. Together, they boarded the lead strike shuttle, its hull scarred, its engines coughing smoke. No banners adorned it. No royal crests. Only hastily spray-painted words scrawled across the side. "Born for battle." The shuttle shook violently as it launched, punching through the weak shields, hurtling toward the distant blinking dot of enemy forces assembling at the asteroid ring. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Soldiers checked weapons, tightened harnesses, whispered prayers no gods would hear. The queen sat opposite the human, knees braced against the rough steel floor, her fingers tapping a silent rhythm against her thigh. He caught the beat, smiled crookedly. "Nervous?" She shook her head. "Ready." He leaned back, head thumping lightly against the shuttle wall. "Good. Because if we die, I want it to be loud enough the stars hear it." The shuttle rattled hard, anti-air blast booming outside. The pilot cursed over the intercom. "Heavy fire incoming. Brace." The human and the queen locked eyes. Neither flinched. The world might end outside. The odds might be a joke. But in that battered ship, heading into a battle they couldn't win, two souls stood ready. Not because they believed they were invincible, because they believed each other worth fighting for. And that was enough. The shuttle hit atmosphere over the asteroid belt, alarm screaming. The queen rose, drawing a battered sidearm and a short plasma blade. The human followed, cocking an old assault rifle that hummed faintly with unstable energy. The hatch lights blinked red, then green. They moved first, charging into the unknown, as explosions flared and enemy fire lit up the black. Two figures against the tide. Two warriors who had no business surviving, but every intention of carving their names into the bones of the universe anyway. Together, the hatch exploded outward into chaos. Fire and shrapnel tore across the landing zone, turning steel and stone into a swirling maelstrom. Blinding flashes lit the torn ground. Concussive blasts hurled bodies through the vacuum-scarred air. The queen and the human moved as one, not following plans, not obeying orders, but driven by something deeper: survival, defiance, the desperate, stubborn will to carve a future out of the wreckage. They hit the ground running, ducking under a hailstorm of gunfire. The human's rifle barked in brutal rhythm, each shot a defiant heartbeat against the roar of the enemy. The queen fought like a force of nature, blade flashing blue in the thick, choking smoke, her sidearm punching holes in armored suits with surgical precision. Enemy mercenaries surged around them, outnumbering them 5-1, 10-1, but numbers meant nothing against the sheer force of will. They fought like wolves, back to back, every move honed by blood and trust. The human stumbled once, a blast catching him in the ribs, but the queen was there, pivoting smoothly, laying down suppressing fire until he could rise again. When the queen was dragged down by two armored brutes, it was the human who tore them off her, roaring with a fury born of something older and fiercer than duty. They carved a bloody path through the enemy lines, every step paid for with pain and breath in the shattering of chains that had bound them too long. Ahead, across the broken battlefield, loomed the command hub, the brain of the enemy fleet, hidden beneath layers of defenses, bristling with weapons and automated turrets. The human pointed with his rifle, panting. "There." She nodded, grim. If they could take it out, even cripple it, the enemy forces would collapse into chaos. It was a fool's chance. It was enough. Together, they charged. The ground shook under the thunder of explosions. Missiles streaked overhead, trailing molten contrails. Turrets spun, tracking them. They split instinctively, the Queen diving low, slicing her way through the heavy troopers guarding the perimeter, the human bounding through broken cover, tossing grenades with deadly precision, cutting firing lanes into the heart of the defenses. For every step forward, pain demanded a price. A grazing shot tore a line of heat across the Queen's thigh. A ricocheting shard sliced deep into the human's side. They kept moving. They kept standing. One turret locked onto the Queen, spitting a spray of burning plasma. The human saw it. Saw the inevitable. He moved. Fast. Brutal. Without thought. He threw himself into the line of fire again, tackling her sideways just as the turret unleashed a volley that would have vaporized her where she stood. They hit the ground hard, his body shielding hers, his breath knocked out in a ragged gasp. She rolled atop him, firing 2 precise shots that turned the turret into a smoking wreck. For a heartbeat, they lay there, tangled, bruised, bleeding, alive. She pressed her forehead to his, her armor scraping his battered gear. "You stupid, stubborn man," she breathed. He grinned, blood on his teeth. "Saved your ass again." They rose together, staggering, limping, but burning with an untouchable light. The hub loomed just ahead. The last defenses crumbled as their strike team, scattered but ferocious, surged behind them, emboldened by the sight of 2 battered souls refusing to fall. They breached the command center in a storm of smoke and shouts. The enemy commander, sleek, polished, armored like a king of old, sneered from his platform, flanked by elite guards. He raised a hand, preparing a final order, a last devastating volley. The Queen shot him through the throat without hesitation. The hull froze. Silence dropped like a blade. The human kicked the command console with a grunt of effort, sparks flying. The mainframe shattered. Screens blinked out. The battle outside staggered, enemy ships stuttering, defense grids falling dark. The tide turned in a single breath. The Queen and the humans stood at the heart of the ruin, side by side, drenched in blood and smoke, breathing hard. Around them, cheers erupted, raw and ragged, the sound of people who had forgotten how to hope, remembering it all at once. The enemy fleet fractured, confused and leaderless, some ships surrendering, others fleeing into the cold dark. Victory was not clean. It was not glorious. It was bought with blood and stubbornness and the absolute refusal to bow. When the Queen looked at him, this human, this nobody, this miracle, she saw not a savior. She saw a choice. And when he looked at her, he saw not a queen. He saw a future. The battlefield calmed. The wounded were gathered. The dead were mourned. The sky, for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, was quiet. In the aftermath, as the surviving fleet pulled itself into ragged formation, she stood on the shattered command platform, facing her people. No crown, no throne, just the truth. She raised their joined hands, hers and his, bloodstained, scarred, unstoppable. "This," she said, voice carrying like a storm across the broken ruins, "is what loyalty looks like. Not blood, not banners. Choice." And somewhere, across 1,000 broken worlds, sparks caught. Empires would fall. New alliances would rise. Because 2 people, once enemies, once strangers, chose to stand together when the world demanded they fall. And in doing so, they lit a fire that no empire could ever extinguish. Together, they faced the stars. And for the first time, the stars blinked first.